Right, good morning, everyone. My name's Roy Green. I'm chair of the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Hub, among other things, former dean of the business school at UTS, and with a long-term interest in manufacturing, of course. May I begin by paying our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, which is where I am. They are the traditional custodians of knowledge on our land, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present, and I do so on behalf of everyone here, wherever you may be. So there is a huge interest in Australian manufacturing again, and this is a session that is being hosted by the relatively newly established Australian Cobotics Centre, a centre that is funded essentially by the Australian Research Council under the Industrial Transformation Program, and has as its partners 4 universities, QUT, UTS, Swinburne, and Technical University Dortmund, and a number of industry partners, including Cook Medical, which is represented here today by Gareth Keen. And so, yes, the interest in manufacturing is entirely justified, and not only is not unwelcome, but it is absolutely necessary given what we have seen over the COVID period with the vulnerability of our supply chains and the way in which they've exposed deep underlying issues, structural issues in the Australian economy, including sluggish productivity and wage stagnation. And we're seeing the evidence of that around us today. But not only that, also the imperative of energy transition. And these all reflect what I think would be widely understood as an outdated industrial structure, one which is less complex than other countries, and by complexity measured by the Harvard Atlas of Complexity, meaning low diversity and low research intensity of our export mix, given how heavily dependent we are on export of unprocessed raw materials, and with the associated decline of our manufacturing to about 6% of our GDP. Very low self-sufficiency compared with the rest of the OECD, down from 12% at the beginning of the century, 25 or 30% in the 60s and 70s, and now also characterized by the doubling of our manufacturing trade deficit in the last 20 years to $180 billion, and a new government in town, which has committed to redressing the situation, not just rebuilding, but reinventing our manufacturing, because it's not going to be looking the same as it did in the past, and that's really what our discussion today will be about. It means much greater investment in the future in research and innovation. We're right down to 1.79% of GDP. Other countries are hitting 4 and 5% of GDP as they use research and innovation to power their way in post-COVID recovery. So there's a huge challenge ahead. And the Australian Cobotics Centre has dedicated its research capacity and its connections with manufacturing more widely to the whole an interesting and important area of the relationship between people, technology, and systems, because robotics and automation is not just about technology, it's the relationship between technology and people and the systems in which we operate and we create in order to achieve high skill, high productivity jobs. And that's really what we're about today. So thank you all for coming. And if you'd like to ask a question towards the end, there will be an opportunity to do that. Maybe just use the chat function on the at the bottom of your screen. And now let me go straight to introducing our panel, who will be talking about the challenges facing us and what we need to do about them. I'll start with Cori Stewart, who is the CEO of the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Hub. This hub draws together the best scientists, technical specialists, designers, engineers working side by side to develop commercial robotic solutions. to transform high potential ideas into new products and services and to accelerate adoption to generate economic growth. Andrew Dettmer is the National President of the AMWU, Australian Manufacturing Workers Union. Now, Andrew has been involved in industry participation policy and vocational education and training policy for many years, certainly as long as I can remember, Andrew, seeking to improve the productive performance of Australia's manufacturing and construction industries and the role of workers and their representatives. Professor Sally McArthur is Director of Swinburne's Manufacturing Futures Institute. She is part of a team at Swinburne exploring new ways to link industry and academia to create a new generation of entrepreneurial, innovative, and internationally connected graduates capable of driving the medical and manufacturing sectors forward in Australia and internationally. And Gareth Keen, Manufacturing Engineering Manager at Cook Medical. An amazing company. He started as an apprentice on the shop floor before becoming a degree qualified mechanical engineer and moving into operations management with experience across multiple industries. His focus is on continuous improvement across all parts of manufacturing, including safety and quality. So we'll turn to Gareth first, and may I start our discussion by asking you about why Cook is manufacturing here. You design and manufacture in Australia. 94% of your business is in exporting, which is extraordinary. So tell us why are you manufacturing in Australia, Gareth?
Yeah, thanks, Roy. Morning, everybody. So Cook, people know the history much of Cook Australia, but established in the 60s, really with a pioneering products, and was at the forefront, I guess, of a couple of some medical device manufacturing back then. So Cook is in the early days was very obviously big on connecting and collaborating, and so as part of that, they were, establishing the connections with local surgeons and the like, and developing products that required, the need. There was a need there, in developing products to meet that need. So a couple of key ones were endovascular grafts, which are, for the treatment of vascular disease. And these products were developed in partnership with Perth-based vascular clinicians, and obviously at the time, one of the few companies that could produce patient-specific devices. So, and still to this day, patients have limited options in this space, and we're really providing a niche product. The other one was the IVF technology to enable people to conceive a child that ordinarily couldn't, and that sort of kicked off in the 60s as well, and we continue to make those products in Australia to this day. I think the key thing is that connecting and collaborating. We've had Cook has invested a lot of resources and research and development over the years. That hasn't stopped. We've got a sizable research and development team in Australia, and we've just released a new MINC incubator, IVF incubator, onto the market. So we continue to grow and develop and releasing products. And I guess the difference is we've had, we obviously established the early pathways to market, and we're supported by a parent company in the US, which is a key thing of note. And the collaboration piece has been really strong, and just for example, I'm actually at Cochlear ResMed today as part of an ongoing collaboration that Cook and the companies have established over the years, just to share learnings, challenges, and and today the regulatory framework is changing and becoming more challenging, and we're just having to rise to meet that need. So we're supporting each other and enabling other Australian manufacturers to succeed. So yeah, that's great to be part of, and that's not something that I haven't been with Cook for just nearly coming on a year now, but that's just something that Cook's always done over the years. And and I was also at a manufacturing conference with the Polymer Association yesterday, and that was the theme. The other manufacturers as well was the connection and collaboration is you can't underestimate the power that has. So I think that's the difference with us. We've continued to do that and been successful over the years, and we'll do so for many more years to come, I'm sure.
Yeah, Gareth, I might just follow up your last couple of points there, which are really interesting. I wasn't aware of your collaboration with Cochlear and ResMed. I wonder if you could just elaborate that a bit without letting out any commercially confident information. I guess the question we always ask in Australia is, we see clustering working geographically around the world, but we're such a dispersed continent. Can it work in Australia successfully?
So I mean, the collaboration piece, Roy?
Collaboration and the notion of industry clustering, where in many other countries with much stronger histories in manufacturing than we do, companies cluster together, share complementary skills, and the more is than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, I think what can work in Australia, and it is working, I guess, for Cook as a some of the learnings that we get from today will certainly apply. I think it's taken I think the sentiment certainly was great to be able to be together face to face, and obviously both the companies are investing some time and money to get together as well, but realize the importance of that. I think obviously COVID has the COVID impact with Zoom calls and things like that, but I think have impacted the collaboration piece, and it's probably stagnated. But I think as part of even this discussion today, there's an opportunity for people to I guess take the impetus to take on the collaboration initiative more and more. So I think the will, you've got to have the will to do it, I guess, and understand the value in it.
Okay, well, thanks, Gareth. We might come back to that issue of collaboration later in the discussion. But firstly, let's now go to Sally McArthur, and ask you, Sally, what do you see as the key characteristics of Australian manufacturing? What can we do? What do we do well in Australia, and what could we do well?
And I think I thank you so much, Roy, and it's great to be here this morning. And I think so many of the points that Gareth was just mentioning are actually what make Australian manufacturing so powerful. It's the ability to do local manufacturing for a global market, that being really important, that we're focused on not what we need necessarily just in Australia, but we're looking at a global market and we're thinking about global needs. And to do that, we bring together global workforce as well. So Australia being the place that we can bring together multinational workforce to look at the needs and bring that knowledge together. But also that we can go from idea to product all the way through. We get productivity in our manufacturing. We think about the integration of robotics, and we have to be highly productive. So we're at the bleeding edge often of the manufacturing process because we need to be cost effective, or we need to maximize the workforce we've got. So it's always this nexus between the value of the product and understanding how to get value from the product. I think that Australian manufacturers can do really, really well. But I think the other piece is, and I'm seeing this more and more when I'm talking to our industry partners, is they're wanting to onshore. And so the connections and the people who actually make those connections. I think that's the other really lovely thing in the Australian ecosystem, is there's so many great people and programs that help companies connect. And the more we do that, the easier it is for the smaller companies to be part of those networks, because they're not needing to generate all of that themselves. They don't have to have the people dedicated to finding those connections. There are other people in the ecosystem who do those connections. So I think that really important design excellence, We look at the quality of the design capabilities and the things that actually even the big multinationals, the car industry, left in Australia because Australia was the place that people wanted to work. That was the population driver that then connects all the way through, and that ability to maybe have your designers in next door to your factory, and the fast turnaround then of that type of process, the adjustments, the testing ideas, I think is hugely important. The other piece I think that's hugely important is the other ecosystem pieces that we have around infrastructure and de-risking that allows, and that's again where the collaborations. Now, could we be better at it? Obviously, yes, of course we could. And could we have more things to help us do that? Absolutely. But I think the pieces that allow us to de-risk the robotics, the things that that the training centre is trying to do to explore and connect people, are the real power. They're the superpowers of the Australian manufacturing network. And I think that's what makes us super effective. And we see that in the medtech sector, which I generally belong to, but we see it in other sectors as well, as we're coming through with energy and things like that at the moment. That ecosystem is really strong and innovative. And that's what makes it so powerful.
Yes, well, thank you, Sally. And just to follow up there on car assembly production, we've of course lost the car assembly element of that ecosystem, which was seen as a very serious blow to Australian manufacturing. Can we recover from that? Can we build sufficient critical mass in manufacturing in other areas, even from the remnants of the car industry?
I think we see that. We see things like Carbon Revolution making wheels for Porsche. We see, you know, the companies that have actually had a strong niche, and coming back to that niche product that has value and understands the market need for that. I think it's always going to be hard to compete on, you know, your generic product that could be made in any number of places. But again, this is where the innovation piece becomes really important. The companies that are super successful obviously have a product that other people want. That's such a motherhood statement, I know, but they've actually worked out what they're really good at and what their value proposition is for their customer. So that's how they're building it, and they're nurturing that and then growing that up. And I think our next challenge is actually to find more products for those companies that are innovative that they can keep making, that they can add to their, so that they grow through that, and that how they optimize productivity and their systems that go around it and keep their people. I think that's the other thing. We're in a bit of a Hunger Games around people. And so our next step is the skills, the workforce readiness, and all of the rest of those things, and creating jobs that people want to stay in and that add value to their lives. And again, that's where the people part of this is what makes it all run.
Yes, it's interesting to see what's happened to the automotive components sector. Obviously, many have gone out of business, but others have in fact thrived and repositioned in global markets and value chains. Some have moved into entirely new industry sectors. And that's really the ingenuity that underlies Australian manufacturing, and something we need to see much more of in the future. And part of that, of course, is what role can government play in setting a framework for future manufacturing. And so I'll turn now to Andrew. I just wonder, from your point of view, what are the policies you're looking forward to from the new Labor government? And what are the policies do you think that we'll need to meet the scale of the challenge with limited funding, but at the moment, I think not very cost effectively allocated. So there's room for improvement, both in the amount of funding and in its distribution.
Well, never a truer word said. And can I say that part of my response is tempered by the fact that I've just returned from a week in Germany where the manufacturing industry 4.0 forum was looking at the Hanover Messe and various developments in companies such as Siemens, where all of those things seem to be really being turbocharged by the consideration that in Europe, especially in Western Europe, the whole of those economies are having to be rejigged because of their decision to get out of business in Russia, and also to stop receiving for the most part, the transmission of Russian oil and gas as a result of the war in Ukraine. So for me, this government has, of course, manifold challenges, but I think the most fundamental one is, of course, skills and training. Of the $15 billion manufacturing policy, about $1 billion is available for various programs. And one of the things which my union will be pressing for is a reinvigoration of skills and training. Right now, we have a lot of sectors that are offering training and skills, and they're not operating in a unified manner. We have vocational training in universities operating in a way that they're competing with each other, oftentimes even competing between the various institutes. And I think that it's really beyond time that we decided that there was a really critical need for there to be greater cooperation, because after all, we don't have any time to waste. I would hope that the programs that this government deals with go to those things which a number of the players in Germany were telling us needed to be part of the mix, and that is to ensure that that workers are included, that there is a worker voice in determining training needs, but also in some instances the delivery of that training, certainly in terms of the curriculum which is being provided. And for me, it's really critical as well that we reflect upon the fact that our German counterparts, for instance, IG Metall, the world's biggest trade union, which is heavily involved in the Platform Industry 4.0 program, which is sponsored and funded, more importantly, by the federal government in Germany, that program shows to us that if we spend a lot of time basically delivering training and also ensuring that the technologies which are adopted are part of the process of acceptance for those workers, that there will be a lot more opportunity then to deal with these technological advances, because of course if we have a more skilled workforce, rather than dealing with the skills of the 20th century, that we have a workforce which is dealing with the skills required for the 21st century, that will become much more adaptable in dealing with those things which some of the other commenters, some of the other participants and presenters have referred to. Can I say also, Roy, that you won't be surprised to know that we, as the union that used to be the car making union, we are still making cars, although mainly they are in small batches. We're also very heavily involved in buses and trucks, and there's a lot of talk now about, notwithstanding what Scott Morrison said about how trucks couldn't haul, you wouldn't get a battery-operated semi-trailer. Unfortunately, the former Prime Minister obviously was very ill-informed, because in fact the Germans have had electric trucks capable of hauling standard and very large weights for some years now. But we have a sector in Australia which is ready to go, which is still producing very significant numbers of buses and trucks. And for me, that's really the key to us developing a much more skilled workforce. You are completely right, as you know, Roy, because you've been involved in it for so many years. The vehicle industry was the technology incubator for this country in many respects. We used to have a very strong vehicle industry, aerospace industry, rail manufacturing industry, etc. And what we need to do, even though is that we're not going to go back to building steam locomotives, but we certainly could return to the construction of and assembly of electric vehicles. And the skills needed to do that need to be developed, because obviously one of the things which an electric car has, and the skills required to produce an electric motor, for instance, whereas previously an internal combustion engine would have upwards of 200 moving parts, an electric motor has only, I think, 17 to 18. So on that being the case, the skills required to do that are much more involved in the manufacturing and fabrication of those, rather than the fitting of those parts together. And for me, those skills can be revived. What Sally said about Carbon Revolution, I was involved in Carbon Nexus, the original organisation set up by Deakin University, and that was, I think, a really signal attempt to change the conversation in Australia. It's interesting that was set up under a Labor government. For mine, the election of a Labor government and the openness of people like Ed Husic, the new industry minister, to look at these innovations required in skills and training means that not only will we have the industry minister involved, but also the new skills and training minister, Brendan O'Connor, who's a bit of an old hand in this, having been former Minister for Skills and Training. They know how this sector works. And for mine, that's a really exciting initiative, and something that will enable us to build on some of the initiatives which we can bring back from Germany and which we can take forward into the Australian context.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Just following up on rail manufacturing, etc. What do you see as the role of public procurement and local participation plans in that context? Because we've seen a lot of manufacturing wiped out due to very short-sighted, especially state government public procurement policies.
Well, so the whole thing that infected governments for 20 years or more was the desire that everybody was going to be competing on a level playing field. But in fact, what they were doing was ignoring the need for there to be proper decisions taken with respect to procurement. If you have a procurement policy which says you will only purchase Australian-made vehicles, then the only vehicles that are purchased are Australian-made. It's pretty simple. When that fashion for so-called open markets arrived in the 80s, what happened as a result of that was that what was previously the basis of Australian manufacturing innovation in the vehicle industry, it more or less disappeared. It took some years because they worked very hard on various state governments and local governments to get them to start purchasing from outside of Australian-made vehicles. But once that nexus was broken, I think over 100,000 vehicles owned by the Commonwealth, state and local governments in Australia were no longer made here. That market was more or less closed. In Germany, they have a buy local policy, and they have a much larger demand for vehicles there. What we saw, of course, was under successive Liberal governments, absolutely no fear of imposing restrictions on the market to suit particular ideological outcomes, whether that be for union membership or other levels, such as in the building industry. What we believe now can be done, thankfully, because we have that example, what can now be done is that there can be production for local consumption. After all, 70% of all local manufacturing products are consumed within the country of origin. And if those procurement decisions were to be taken by state and local governments as well as the federal government, we would see the almost overnight the revival of an Australian car manufacturing industry, if we were prepared to take that decision. A bold decision, but one which I think should and can be made to ensure that we buy local and buy Aussie made.
And just following up on that prospect of hydrogen battery driven vehicles, Sally, you just mentioned on chat that this is a very exciting prospect for Australia. What's your perspective on how we can become proficient in this? We're a very small player in the world market. Public procurement can play a role, but can we also be engaged in export? And what comes to mind here, of course, is that we have every part of the hydrogen and battery making value chain in Australia. Currently, when we do battery manufacturing, apart from one company, but any others setting up, are exporting raw lithium to China, getting it processed there, bringing it back. So that sort of destroys a major opportunity for value add for our critical mineral resources. How do you see that playing out?
I think it's a really interesting thing in the role that Australia can make in our region as well, because we're not the only ones who want the end product. So the regional focus that we can take in the Pacific, the fact that this is a sustainability issue, so we can play into a number of different ways of thinking about it, but we have that opportunity to build some manufacturing sectors that link into our knowledge and capability, but we can build them from scratch to be sustainable. And they need to be financially and workforce sustainable as well as environmentally sustainable. And so we look at those developments around Gladstone, and we look at where, you've got the solar, you've got the energy sources, you've got the ability to bring a workforce together. But it comes back to Andrew's point. It has to be about training and skilling and bringing the right skills to the people where they are. So we look at the Hunter, we look at Gladstone, we look at Latrobe Valley and Victoria as well, where we have highly skilled workforces. We may need to bring some of the technologies in, but they still need to be adapted. And I think we've seen that with buses brought into the Pilbara, that they didn't really work in the Australian environment. So that's the next stage, is we can bring technologies in, but they're still going to need to be tailored to the Australian environment as well. So they're the opportunities. We look at regional communities that need energy. We look at energy dependence on diesel in these regions. These aren't cheap things to supply. So gen sets and those sorts of opportunities that are, for right now, appropriate for Australia, not necessarily appropriate for Germany, but would be appropriate for Brazil or other countries, that we can actually see the parallels. And so by starting our manufacturing for Australia, but knowing which markets we can partner into, I think they're the exciting opportunities here. And that, again, that passion that people have for being part of an industry that is going to make a difference, I think is also something else we can't underestimate. Again, back to your people, we need to be doing our skilling in the workplace. And if you look at the German example, that's so much of what they're doing. It's not separate. It's not go off and do a 2-year degree somewhere else. It's integrated into the workplace. So that's a really interesting way of thinking about it.
Yes, absolutely. And Gareth, maybe I can go to you and ask what your experience is of getting the right kind of skills into your workplace, and also you could comment on the med tech and pharma sector more generally. That is one of the truly successful parts of the Australian manufacturing performance over the last few years. Your company, Cochlear, ResMed in particular, but others as well, skills must be a big constraint. How do you deal with that, and what would be your advice to a new government?
The skills challenge is definitely a challenge for us. I guess trying to find not only people in the manufacturing space with have had manufacturing experience, probably more from the leadership point of view, the shop floor leader aspect, but also the professional engineering and people that have had product experience, or the connection between manufacturing a product, but also the design and regulatory hurdles that we need to overcome is probably a challenge. So having that practical experience from an engineering point of view is probably where we'll find the biggest gap at the moment. So if we bring a new engineer in from university, I guess we're trying to have a training program to bring them up to speed in terms of what it's like in manufacturing. And some people haven't had exposure to manufacturing and see it as a bit daunting, to be perfectly honest. And we've had people say, would like to start. They might be in a food industry or in another role that's not related to manufacturing, and then they'll come into a manufacturing environment and find that it's really scary and they don't like it. We find our attrition's quite high from that point of view. I guess school leavers, the apprenticeship model's sort of taken a bit of a hit, so you're not seeing apprentices come through. It's not as strong as it was back in my day, when doing an indentured apprenticeship was a really good career pathway. They're not there anymore, so people take for granted the fact that the loaf of bread's going to be on the table, and don't really ask the question, how did that loaf of bread get here and get into the supply chain? It's just taken for granted, I guess, with difference in generations and things like that. So I guess just on just talking about this, the medtech sector in general, it has been successful, and you look at companies like Illum and Vaxis that Vaxis was at the conference I was at yesterday, and this topic came up, and we're talking about because they've obviously got a new product they want to take to market, and they're finding that. So we said, what was the one thing that would prevent you from, because at the moment they're going to be manufacturing offshore, looking at manufacturing offshore, and we're talking about that sovereign capability, and they're talking about having that guaranteed product pathway. So yes, we've got the innovation, and we're really innovative. We develop products really well. The collaboration has been strong, but they get to a point where there's a funding gap, and there's probably not the support that they need. And in the case of Illume as another example, their product wasn't approved in Australia, so they've been so the US has given them that guarantee of future sales, and now they're setting up a manufacturing plant in the US. So what do we need to change to make it attractive for people to say, oh, the proposition it's solely it's been innovated in Australia, set up, the supply chain's been set up, and we're manufacturing in Australia, as I think it's that product pathway, along with the lack of skills and training, as Andrew talked about, are the two big things that we need to set the framework up to make that possible.
Great, thanks, Gareth. I'll go to Cori now, and Cori, I'm aware that you have to catch a flight and leave us about 10:02. So perhaps we could turn to you and ask about the role of collaboration, in particular in developing manufacturing capability, and reflect on the experience of the ARM Hub in that context. ARM Hub being about 2 years old, playing a very major part as an industry-led research collaboration hub in reconstructing important parts of SME-based Queensland manufacturing, and also with a wider role. Can you tell us what works and what doesn't work in your experience in terms of collaboration between research institutions, business, and the ARM Hub?
Well, thanks, Roy. There's a couple of really important points to make here, but I'll respond very quickly to that sort of on-the-ground experience, and it really does dovetail into the training question. I think we have such a thin level of ongoing structure in which to work within in Australia in terms of, comparatively to overseas, and we'll get back to that, the skills base needs to, in our experience, has to be built on a project with a company, and it's often working because you're working with SMEs right in their commercial reality. So it's not that you've got this R&D process that gradually feeds into an innovation cycle and a development cycle within a company. It's usually that this is all happening simultaneously. So you need flexibility, you need agility, and you need to be able to work with companies over short and medium term, so 3 months to a year, to build those skills capability in the team that's on the ground in the collaboration process. So you're usually working on a product that's commercial and building skills at the same time. So the ARM Hub has been structured in a way that really is able to bring the expertise that may sit and typically does sit within the universities, but also our in-house kind of professional expertise, in engineering, robotics, data science and design that can apply a complete commercial solution alongside a company and some leading technical capability that's coming from the university. So that sort of collaboration is a very real and tangible building teams process in the ARM Hub. We're working at any time on about 20 projects, mostly with SMEs, but also with large companies looking at supply chains, also large companies also looking at modernising their own manufacturing practice. So that sort of micro experience that we're having day to day, I think is actually a really obvious reflection of these biggest structural challenges and opportunities that we really need to tackle head on in Australia. And I think it's come through everyone's conversation so far, but I'm going to say it again, an urgent need to have a long-term systemic view about how we're going to build industry, making sure not only the money is there, but the vision in which we can say, this is something we're committing to. People can build careers, build products, and they can go to market. I mean, I think Vaxis, for example, going offshore, I have several opinions about that, but I think that is a case to me. It's not that we don't have the capability or skills in Australia, or even locally, even here in Queensland, to service their needs. I think it's a case of Vaxxus board and the decision-making teams in Vaxxus looking at Australia as a whole, saying, is this really the place that we feel like we're really confident they've got a plan and they're going to support us in the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years to build success in a company in Australia, and is the structure there? So I think it's worth talking about that structure. And I know this is a topic that you know very well yourself, Roy, and Andrew and the team here, and Sally, but there are successful examples globally about how we can build this structure. And I think probably the dominant conversation is around the UK catapult centres, but it's not just those. It's the US manufacturing institutes. It's in Israel, Canada, Singapore, and the Nordic countries as well, where they have hubs like ours or equivalent on a larger scale invested in over many, many years, and they have areas of specialised expertise that work in collaboration with the other centres. So it's not a kind of competitive competition environment, it's a structured, understood, and they have overarching agencies which help them navigate those technical unique capabilities. And the reason why I think the UK catapult centres is particularly interesting is some of the just conversations coming out of them now. And it's interesting, Andrew was obviously just there in the last week, so you probably have your own thoughts on this, Andrew, but they've recently come out and they're able to expand on this model of just being, I guess, about industrial transformation and industry development and attraction, which has happened quite successfully, particularly around the advanced manufacturing, to looking at setting up kind of incubators around major industry attraction that deals with social and regional policy agendas about bringing in areas like the West Midlands, Glasgow and Manchester. So it's actually becoming a much more integrated model about, you know, future training, future regional development. And this is significant for a country like Australia, where we have such regional challenges and opportunities in terms of where our resources are, the industries we're going to be particularly good at or be able to value add in, like critical minerals. And, you know, we have significant social and geographic challenges to overcome. So it sort of is flagging the way in which to do that. And of course, there's a whole evidence base that has been built up over time. So the investment is able to flow from, you know, central governments into significant industry policy commitments. So there is inspiration on the horizon. What I think day to day we experience is a very, very patchy 6 months to a year, you know, dropping of major grants over the last decade. Maybe not joined up. I was going to say maybe not joined up. Let's just face it, not joined up. Different people, different modalities of working, where you could have leveraged that investment into a more significant, more sustained investment, which hasn't happened. So you lose your workforce, your workflow. You may, you know, we're in a competition, as everyone has pointed out, for talent. You know, that talent is going to go to where they can see their careers. Now, I think some aspects of what we're doing in Australia is exciting around talent and attraction. I think probably Adelaide and South Australia more broadly is really onto it, making sure we've got a pipeline coming from other countries that see Australia as a great place to build a career and have a life and work with smart people. But I don't think we're doing it in a systematic way again, and I think we've probably got lots to learn from that from other areas of Australia. So, I mean, kudos to South Australia and maybe particularly some of the institutions in Adelaide for taking a leadership role there. Probably the last thing probably to say, and this is, you know, what drives me and in terms of, you know, making sure the ARM Hub continues to grow and we continue to connect as a national network with all of our peers and our collaborators across the country and indeed globally, is that if we don't do this, it won't just be talent, and there'll be no value add in our industries, and we'll have that low economy future that I think, Roy, I think you're probably really well positioned to paint that picture, but a low economy, low wage future for Australia bodes very poorly for advanced, you know, economic growth and skill set growth, and the future that we all like. So, you know, our livability being greatly diminished. So I think we've all got a really urgent imperative to be working on these issues and investing in manufacturing at scale.
And just quickly, before you go, what role do you see as the Australian Robotics Centre playing in that? You're a member of the centre, it's relatively new as well. How will that contribute to the picture that you've just painted?
Yeah, the Robotics Centre is incredibly exciting investment in the kind of future that we as a society want to see come forth. So we're seeing an advanced manufacturing environment where we're modernising manufacturing, but we're using robotics as tools for people to do their work better. We're also seeing like cobotics be a way of becoming more productive and still having these very human-centered, high-value, creative and agile roles in play in a whole range of workforces. So we're making an agile tooling environment, an agile workforce, and we're making it around the people that can make the difference there. So that really high-value part. The Cobotics Centre is exciting because it is actually grappling with, you know, ideas about how businesses can operate alongside how technology can operate, and really taking a design-led approach which says, you know, it's no good to have these technologies if our industries and our particular businesses that are here in Australia can't use them. So how do we actually think about the need before making the tools and the processes for those companies? And I think what we're certainly starting to see, and it's great to have Cook Medical represented here, is the transferability of a lot of that knowledge from one industry sector to the other. So it really is an investment in that broad-based manufacturing, thinking about what a kind of industry 5.0 future where humans are definitely in on the loop and they're making high-value propositions alongside technology and driving productivity.
Great, thanks. So let's turn back to you, Andrew, on government policy, because Cori mentioned their successful examples globally, and we've seen in various countries coordination agencies, ground level industry collaboration hubs that have been very successful, and a lot of them take their lessons essentially from the role of the Fraunhofer Institutes. The Catapult certainly do, the Manufacturing USA Institutes, and you've just been over there. What impressed you about what you saw in Germany and perhaps more widely in Europe in terms of development of Industry 4.0 mechanisms, policy mechanisms, and indeed the shift that is now being contemplated to Industry 5.0?
Well, yes. In fact, the Hannover Messe, which is, I think, the world's preeminent tech show, which was slightly smaller due to the pandemic, but nevertheless, I think still had 9 very large pavilions stacked full of technology. It featured a lot of discussion about what was going to be the challenges that were going to be faced as a result of the things I was referring to before, you know, the need to convert to hydrogen and electrical sources of energy as a result of the pandemic, the lack of skilled people coming through, etc. And what that means, I suppose, and what I observed, is that there was less of a focus on issues of new and innovative technology, although plenty of that was there, and more of a focus on what skills do we need to achieve the technology that we have. And I've got to say that in Germany, they're casting about for responses as well. They're not suggesting that they've got all of the answers to the issues that are confronting their industry. But one thing that they do know is that, as has just been said by Cori, this issue of the challenge of skills has to be met. It's about engaging with the people who are in the industry at the moment and seeking their engagement about the technologies that are being proposed, but it's also about attracting and retaining new people, whether they be in training through apprenticeships or cadetships or other forms of technology. And of course, in Germany, they don't have you know, a HEX debt, massive student loans, etc. They actually don't charge for training and skills education. that makes a huge difference in what it means that those price signals, which our economists are very fond of talking about, aren't really an issue for people who want to undertake a new career. People don't check their bank balance before they undertake training. They actually if they want to do it, they go to either the training provider, whether that be a university, a technical high school, or their employer, to see whether or not they can undertake it, and of course get paid as they're doing it. So that difference in the system means that there's a greater throughput. Mind you, they do have a problem with retention. They also have a problem with getting young people, especially, to conclude their training so that they're a fully skilled worker in either an apprenticeship, a cadetship, or other form. And so, for me, what I take away from that, and also what I observe in Australian industry, is that there is an absolute requirement for us to focus on the skilled workers at the various levels, from whether they be professional engineers through to production workers who are involved in it, and to talk about the need for the technology to be human-centered. The great thing about cobotics, of course, is you couldn't get more human-centered technology if you tried, because after all, it's about mimicking human movement to reproduce actions, to produce a component or other form of activity. And for mine, that's a really encouraging development. There wasn't as I say, there wasn't a lot of talk about new technologies. Obviously, these companies are trying to sell their new products, and good on them. But there was a lot of talk about getting commitment of the workforce, making sure that social license, which I think is what really we're now talking about Industry 5.0, although I try and avoid it because we didn't really get acceptance of Industry 4.0. But it's really critical, I think, that what we have is the capacity to bring people with us. Unless we've got the capacity to bring people with us, and for people to see themselves in this environment, and that's a really critical thing. If a worker, for instance, doesn't see a place for him or herself in a production environment, they'll think, well, I'm either going to go elsewhere or I'm going to resist. If they can see a place for themselves in the environment, either manipulating the materials, developing the materials, creating the new processes which they're about, they will take it with both hands. That's, I think, well established. And the catapult centres, for instance, and also Fraunhofer is really a key to that. We need to turbocharge our research and to see places like CSIRO. Up here in Brisbane, we've got the Robotics Centre, which I think is doing world-class work, but it's doing it on a shoestring and with a workforce which is continually being raided by other companies who want them to come and work for them. And no wonder, they're very skillful people. But the fact is, we haven't taken a programmatic view. We haven't tried to combine the skills and training of places like TAFE with the universities and with the companies and with research organisations. And that is, I think, what distinguishes both the German approach and also the approach that's exemplified in the catapult centres, but also in a number of other organisations, for instance, in Austria, which we also visited briefly, and which I think is also facing the same challenges and trying to deal with them in the same or similar fashion.
Yeah, the threat is sometimes seen as too much technological change, when in fact the real threat in Australia is not enough. So just a few closing comments, if I may ask. We're reaching the end of our time. First to you, Gareth, what do you see as the important next steps for manufacturing in Australia and the new government in particular? What would you like to see, say, in the next 6 months to a year, the government take action on?
Yeah, I think I'm obviously excited by the notion of the government allocating funding, and they talked about medical devices in particular, but for manufacturing, I guess it'd be good to see a plan, the funding of how that's going to be allocated. And, Andrew sort of alluded, talking about the training component of that. I definitely think there's a gap there. I think, part of that funding was setting up the framework and setting up the environment so that businesses can, and startups have the environment so they can progress into a market and a supply chain, and they're supported all the way through that. And Cori was talking about that as well. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know, but my concern is that the the funding is a notion. You know, obviously talking about politics and things like that is, you know, there's been a track record of funding being allocated, and it's just not been aimed at the right. There's been no structure, and there's really no thought gone into how that's going to be allocated. So yeah, I'd love to see a plan and the government to outline a plan on what that's going to and how that's going to help us solve some of those challenges we talked about. Yeah, I think that's the next steps, and obviously engaging with industry, with people like us, and just to get you know, a good perspective on that plan as well.
Yeah, the two ministers to start getting to know are Ed Husic, the new Minister for Industry and Science, as well as Tim Ayres, who is the Minister for Manufacturing, or Assistant Minister for Manufacturing and Trade. So that's an interesting portfolio, because trade's been put into DFAT some years ago, probably a mistake, but anyway, we have to live with it. And manufacturing is a division within the Department of Industry. So it'll be quite an interesting bureaucratic challenge to manage policy straddling both of those two departments. And the other department, of course, which will be key, is Department of Education. And we'd like to see a lot more interaction between those departments, as opposed to their siloed approach, which has been characterized the last few years. So just to finish up now, Sally, is there an inspirational note that you could leave us with on the future of manufacturing in Australia? Where are we going? What would you ideally like to see happening over the next few years?
I think this whole piece keeps coming down to the people and the way that we nurture our people to be in that supply chain, and enabling the companies who want to join in. So that support mechanisms that we put there, the connectors, that we recognise the value of the connectors, and that we try and be a little more consistent with the programs, and not worry about, oh, well, that was the previous government's program, so we can't possibly have it. It worked. Let's just keep doing it. Do we have to change it every time? I think that is the stuff that most people are sort of looking at. Well, I just worked out how to make that work, or people are constantly shuffling. So if we could have a couple of years of stability so that everybody could stabilize, know the program, know what they could do, they could plan ahead how they could use that program rather than just reacting. We're very reactive. And I think Trailblazer was a classic example of, we do a lot of, please come and join us. And some of us in universities are feeling like industry botherers rather than collaborators. And so how do we actually plan ahead? How do we build that into those development cycles? But again, focus on the people, focus on the connections. The innovation is all people-driven. The ideas are all people-driven. The technology will be applied in the right places. And that is actually, I think, the most important part of what we can do. So focus on the peeps.
Great. Well, thank you, Sally. That's a great note on which to end our session. Thank you to our panelists, Cori, Andrew, Gareth. Thank you, Merrin, for setting all this up. Thank you, John Roberts, the Director of the Australian Cobotics Centre, for orchestrating this event, and good luck to everyone in Australian Made Week. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Roy.